The sun was warm over Charlotte as I pulled into the parking lot of the country club, the familiar hum of Sunday brunch traffic mingling with distant laughter from the patio. I'd come expecting polite smiles, awkward conversations, and the usual undercurrent of competitiveness that always followed Meredith. She had invited me ostensibly to meet her newborn niece, but I already sensed the tension the moment I stepped into the dining room. Meredith was hovering near the high chair, her posture rigid, her eyes scanning the room like a general inspecting her troops. When she saw me approach, her face tightened. She held her baby protectively, and the warmth I'd hoped to offer dissolved instantly under her glare. "Don't touch my baby, you are disgusting," she snapped, voice sharp enough to turn a few heads. The words struck me like a cold gust, and I stopped short, stunned into silence. My own heartbeat seemed too loud in my ears as I realized that any attempt to explain myself would only escalate the situation. I retreated slightly, forcing a polite smile while keeping my hands firmly at my sides. The baby, oblivious to the tension, cooed softly, reaching toward me with tiny fingers. I froze, a twinge of sadness cutting through my shock. Meredith's glare hardened, and the motherly shield she held around her child made it clear that my presence was not only unwelcome but offensive in her eyes. For the rest of the brunch, I sat quietly at the edge of the table, observing the conversation flow around me. Meredith dominated every topic, her voice confident, her laughter light but edged with control. I felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, dismissed not just by her, but by the family who allowed it. By the time the brunch ended, I knew one thing: I couldn't let this moment pass without reflection, and the events of the day would stay with me long after the sun set. The drive back to Asheville gave me space to think, to remember past slights, and to consider what I could do differently next. The drive back to Asheville was quiet, the hum of the tires on the highway a steady backdrop to the storm in my mind. I kept my hands tight on the wheel, replaying Meredith's words over and over. "You are disgusting." Those 6 syllables felt heavier than any insult I could remember, not because of their cruelty, but because they came from someone who was supposed to know me. I thought back to every time I had supported her, helped with investments, covered gaps in her decisions, kept quiet when her mistakes could have cost the firm clients. None of it mattered in her eyes. The frustration twisted inside me, a mix of anger and guilt. Why did I let it hurt me so deeply? Why did I care about her opinion after years of being dismissed? Questions churned in my head as the miles passed. Could I let this slide, keep the peace, and maintain the facade of civility? Or was it finally time to acknowledge the imbalance, to assert myself in a way she wouldn't anticipate? I felt the tension between patience and action, the tug-of-war of wanting justice without causing irreparable harm. By the time I crossed into the familiar streets of Asheville, my mind had settled into a tentative resolve. Silence no longer seemed entirely safe, but neither did impulsive retaliation. I needed a plan, one that would give me leverage while keeping my conscience intact. I parked in front of my apartment, the evening light casting long shadows, and sat for a moment before opening my laptop, ready to review the numbers that might give me the upper hand. Chapter 3. Hidden Leverage. Back in my apartment, I pulled up the spreadsheets I had quietly maintained over the past few years. I wasn't a passive investor in Meredith's boutique investment firm. I had always monitored the numbers, tracked the cash flow, and noted how dependent the company had become on my capital. Tonight, in the dim light of my desk lamp, I could finally see the full picture. The firm was over-leveraged. Several pending deals hinged on lines of credit I controlled. A single withdrawal on my part could trigger delays, missed payments, and a scramble to cover obligations. The realization sent a shiver through me, not from malice, but from the raw weight of responsibility. I held more influence than I had ever admitted to myself, and the temptation to wield it was almost intoxicating. As I analyzed the accounts, I reminded myself of Meredith's arrogance. She assumed her control was absolute, her confidence unshakable. She had never anticipated that I was quietly steering critical parts of her business. Every projection I ran confirmed the same conclusion: my investment wasn't just a contribution, it was a lever that could shift the entire firm. I leaned back in my chair, conflicted. The excitement of having power clashed with my ethical hesitation. Could I justify using this leverage as a response to her cruelty, or would I cross a line I couldn't come back from? Each scenario played out in my head like a chess game. Meredith's moves predictable, my responses measured. I realized that this wasn't just about anger. It was about balance, about finally asserting my presence without descending into revenge. Hours passed as I reviewed every pending deal, every line item that depended on me. My decision was forming, slow and deliberate. I wasn't rushing. I needed clarity, certainty, and a plan that left no room for error. By the time the city lights of Asheville blurred past my window, I had mapped out the contours of influence I held. The path forward was narrow but clear, and for the first time in years, I felt a cautious surge of control over my own life and over a situation that had long seemed impossible to navigate. Tomorrow, I would begin putting the plan into motion. The next morning, I began reaching out to my trusted financial advisors, careful to keep the calls discreet. Each conversation was precise, measured, the kind that left no room for misunderstanding. I explained my intentions without emotion, framing the withdrawal as a routine portfolio adjustment. Yet beneath the calm tone, I felt the familiar churn of anticipation and apprehension. Legal counsel followed. I needed the withdrawal executed flawlessly, with every document verified and every procedure airtight. There was no margin for error, not with Meredith's firm depending so heavily on my investment. My lawyer advised me on timelines, potential complications, and the subtle nuances of contractual obligations. I listened carefully, asking questions I already suspected the answers to, making mental notes of where I could apply pressure without drawing attention. As the day unfolded, small complications emerged. The bank requested additional verification on a few transactions, citing internal compliance protocols. A minor error in one document required resubmission. Each delay felt like a heartbeat stretched too long, a reminder that control was never absolute. I resisted the urge to rush, keeping my voice calm and my mind focused. Panic would be a mistake. Patience was a weapon as sharp as any financial lever. Between calls, I reviewed Meredith's public filings, tracking her recent deals and noting where the timing of my withdrawal would have the most impact. I imagined her confidence slowly cracking as she confronted unexpected obstacles. The thought was satisfying, though I pushed it aside, reminding myself that my goal was not humiliation but balance and assertion. By evening, everything was in motion. My advisors were aligned, the paperwork nearly complete, and I had rehearsed the timing of each step with meticulous attention. The tension in my chest had shifted from anxiety to a steady vigilance. Every decision carried weight. Every action a ripple that could reshape the firm and my relationship with Meredith forever. I leaned back in my chair, letting the quiet of my apartment settle over me. The plan was ready, the moment approaching. Tomorrow, I would begin the final steps, and nothing could turn back the course I had set. I arrived at the Charlotte networking event early, taking a seat near the back and observing the room. Meredith was already there, laughing loudly, shaking hands with clients, and commanding attention as if the room belonged solely to her. She carried herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, and I could see the way people deferred to her opinions without question. As the presentations began, Meredith dismissed any mention of potential market risks. She waved off concerns about over-leveraged accounts and upcoming deals, insisting that everything was under control. Her words were casual, her tone light, but the underlying hubris was unmistakable. She truly believed nothing could threaten her grasp on the firm. I sat quietly, taking mental notes. Every shrug, every dismissive comment reinforced what I already knew. Her overconfidence left gaps I could exploit. If I acted with precision, I contrasted her impulsive behavior with my own careful, deliberate strategy. Where she saw certainty, I saw vulnerability. Where she ignored details, I cataloged every potential leverage point. The more I watched, the more the pattern became clear. Meredith's arrogance wasn't just social, it was professional. She underestimated the very person who had been quietly supporting her success, the one holding a stake she thought irrelevant. The thought gave me a quiet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that timing would be everything. Acting too early or too late could undermine the careful equilibrium I had been constructing. By the time the networking hour ended, I had mapped the most opportune moments to proceed. I left the event unnoticed, blending into the crowd, my mind focused entirely on the next steps. Meredith remained oblivious to the quiet storm forming just beyond her awareness, her confidence intact yet dangerously misaligned with reality. Driving back to Asheville, I reviewed the sequence of actions in my head, knowing that the subtle warning signs I had observed today would guide my decisions in the critical days ahead. The morning air in Asheville felt crisp as I sat at my desk, laptop open, files organized, and phone within reach. Today was the day. After weeks of planning, checking, and double-checking every detail, I was finally going to execute the withdrawal of my investment from Meredith's firm. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, a mixture of satisfaction and hesitation swirling inside me. I started with the transfer forms, carefully filling out every field, ensuring accuracy. A minor error flagged by the bank required a phone call and resubmission, but I remained composed. Each step had been anticipated, and I navigated the minor obstacles with the calm patience I had rehearsed. My advisor's voice over the line was steady, guiding me through the procedural nuances, but I could feel the weight of the decision pressing against my chest. As the funds moved out, I watched the numbers update in real time. The firm's balance reflected the shift immediately, and a quiet thrill ran through me. This was more than a financial maneuver. It was a statement, a reclaiming of authority that had been invisible for too long. Yet alongside the satisfaction came guilt, a nagging reminder that family ties were complicated and power could wound even when wielded carefully. I pictured Meredith and Charlotte, confident as ever, completely unaware of the impact that was already unfolding. Her impulsive optimism would soon collide with the reality I had engineered, and I had to resist the urge to check in, to gauge her reaction. Patience was essential. The moment of revelation would have its full effect only if I remained invisible. By late afternoon, all the paperwork had been confirmed, every document verified, and the transfer finalized. I leaned back in my chair, a deep exhale of tension escaping me. The plan was complete, flawless in execution, and now it was out of my hands. I shut my laptop and stared out the window, contemplating the days ahead. The fallout would begin soon, and I had prepared as much as I could. All that remained was to wait, to observe, and to maintain the composure that had brought me this far. Tomorrow, the consequences of my decision would start to reveal themselves, and I would see how the first ripple spread through Meredith's carefully controlled world. The next morning, I checked my phone first thing, expecting nothing more than routine updates. What arrived, however, confirmed the shift I had anticipated. Notifications from financial news outlets, murmurs in professional circles, and internal alerts from the firm all pointed to the same reality. Meredith's company was experiencing immediate liquidity strain. She had discovered the gap left by my withdrawal, and the panic was evident even from afar. The first emails leaked internally concerns about payroll, unsettled transactions, and delayed contracts. Staff members who had once looked to her with unquestioning confidence were now questioning their own security. Calls to clients went unanswered as frontline managers tried to manage the chaos. I could almost hear the frantic energy building in Charlotte through the pattern of alerts. Meredith's initial attempts to reassure investors and employees fell flat. Her usual charm and decisiveness couldn't mask the tangible disruption caused by the sudden withdrawal. Reports were late, deals paused, and the sense of control she had projected so flawlessly was fracturing under the weight of reality. For the first time, The arrogance I had witnessed at the networking event had tangible consequences. I monitored silently, resisting the urge to interfere or communicate. The distance gave me perspective. This was no longer about personal vindication. It was about observing the structural fragility I had long known existed. Every misstep, every overlooked contingency in Meredith's operations highlighted the reliance she had placed on my investment. It was a revelation for her, though she would never admit it openly. The tension in me grew as alerts continued to cascade. Emails flagged with urgent subject lines, client calls bouncing, employees whispering behind closed doors, all signs that the first ripple of my action had become a wave. Meredith's frantic attempts to stabilize the situation were visible in her hurried statements to stakeholders, each one more reactive than the last. I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease, knowing the power I held had real consequences, both professional and emotional. By the afternoon, it became unmistakable the firm's stability was under serious threat. Meredith's confident facade had cracked, her usual control slipping, and I watched as the realization settled over her, heavy and unrelenting. The moment I had been preparing for had arrived, and from my quiet vantage point, I observed the first true signs of reckoning. Tomorrow, the unfolding chaos would reach new intensity, and I would see just how deeply the firm and my sister would feel the absence of what they had once taken for granted. I arrived at the small cafe in Asheville a few minutes early, choosing a quiet corner where we could speak without interruption. Meredith walked in shortly after, her expression a mix of surprise and disbelief when she saw me waiting. She slid into the seat across from me, her usual confidence replaced by tension she couldn't quite mask. "I can't believe this," she said, voice tight. What you did. Do you have any idea what you've caused?" I kept my tone even, measured. "I understand the impact." "Meredith, that's why I moved carefully, ensuring every step was within my rights and fully documented." Her hands clenched around her coffee cup, knuckles white. "Within your rights, you withdrew everything. You destabilized the firm. Employees are panicking. Clients are leaving. How could you be so cold?" I met her gaze calmly. "I didn't act out of malice. I acted because boundaries matter. I've been invisible in the decisions that depended on me, overlooked despite my contributions. You underestimated the role I played and assumed my silence meant consent. It didn't." Meredith's voice cracked slightly, frustration and recognition mingling. "You think this is about proving a point about revenge?" "No," I said firmly. "It's about accountability. It's about showing that actions have consequences, and that confidence unchecked by awareness can lead to failure." She leaned back, a sharp exhale escaping her lips. I could see the realization settling in, the weight of her oversight pressing down. For the first time, the arrogance I had witnessed for years faltered under the tangible results of her misjudgment. I felt the tension between us ease slightly, though the conversation remained charged. My point had been made not through anger, not through confrontation, but through deliberate, principled action. I had asserted both moral and strategic victory, and Meredith had no choice but to acknowledge it, internally, if not aloud. As we left the cafe, the gravity of the moment lingered between us. The lessons of the day would shape how we approached each other going forward, and I knew that reflection, not retaliation, would define the path ahead. Tomorrow, I would take time to process everything that had unfolded and consider how to move forward while maintaining the boundaries I had finally established. Back in my apartment, I sank into the worn leather chair by the window and let the quiet of Asheville envelop me. The events of the past days replayed in my mind: the brunch, the drive home, the meticulous planning, and finally, the confrontation. Each moment carried its weight, and the contrast between past conflicts with Meredith and the calm resolution now felt stark. I thought of the countless times I had been overlooked, dismissed, or minimized in family discussions and business matters. Each slight had left a mark, but none compared to the satisfaction of having acted deliberately, strategically, and with integrity. I had asserted myself without cruelty, proving my influence and capabilities without stooping to aggression. Flashes of old arguments and tense family dinners surfaced, juxtaposed with the composed way I had handled Meredith's arrogance this time. The lessons were clear patience, preparation, and principled action mattered more than loud protests or emotional outbursts. Power was not in domination, but in understanding leverage, boundaries, and the impact of one's choices. As evening settled over the city, I realized that success was no longer about making someone else fail. It was about claiming my own space, my own agency, and respecting the limits I set for myself. The quiet control I now held felt far more empowering than any victory I could have forced externally. I stood, moving to the desk where my laptop still glowed softly, and began planning the next steps: how to maintain my independence, how to protect my investments, and how to navigate the family dynamics with the clarity I had finally achieved. Tomorrow, I would continue building on these lessons, ensuring that the future reflected both the strength of my choices and the boundaries I had fought to establish. In the days that followed, I began to integrate the lessons I had learned into both my personal and professional life. I reached out to family members cautiously, restoring connections without compromising the boundaries I had finally established. Conversations were measured, sincere, and intentional, a far cry from the reactive arguments of the past. At work, I reviewed my investment strategies, identifying opportunities that aligned with my values and long-term goals. Each decision was deliberate, grounded in both financial prudence and ethical considerations. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth through confrontation. The results of my actions had spoken for themselves. I noticed a subtle shift within myself. Calm strategy, patience, and principled decision-making had provided a sense of empowerment far stronger than any impulsive retaliation ever could. I felt grounded, aware of the leverage I held, and confident in my ability to navigate challenges without sacrificing integrity. As I sat by the window that evening, reviewing future plans and mapping the steps ahead, I recognized that the true measure of influence was not the downfall of others, but the strength and clarity of my own choices. The path forward was mine to define, shaped by wisdom, strategy, and a quiet understanding of the power that comes from restraint. With these lessons in mind, I closed my laptop, ready to embrace the next chapter of my life. Independent, deliberate, and unwavering.